There's a very specific, suffocating kind of silence that fills your car when you are sitting entirely alone in the dark, staring up at a hotel window, knowing your wife is inside with another man. That was my tragedy. After years of building what I thought was a solid, loving marriage, I found myself reduced to a painful cliché. The betrayed husband parked outside the Hilton Hotel in downtown Albany on a random Thursday night, watching my entire world burn to the ground. It was the most agonizing moment of my life, a gut-wrenching betrayal that I thought would permanently destroy me. But the funny thing about hitting rock bottom is that you never know what the universe has waiting for you on the rebound. I couldn't have possibly known that this exact nightmare would eventually pave the way for the greatest love I'd ever experienced, or that years later, the woman who replaced my cheating wife would deliver a dose of instant karma so spectacular, it almost felt scripted. But to understand how incredibly satisfying that karma was, you have to understand the sheer depth of the betrayal that started it all. Let me take you back to that Thursday night. It was just past 9:00 p.m., and the crisp, biting chill of the Albany air was seeping through the windows of my sedan. The glowing, oversized sign of the Hilton cast a harsh, unforgiving light across the hood of my car. I was parked across the street, not far from the state capitol building, feeling completely and utterly numb. I wasn't there as a guest. I wasn't there to meet a colleague for a late drink at the hotel bar, and I certainly wasn't there to surprise my wife with flowers. I was there to hunt down Jessica. Or rather, I was there to torture myself with the undeniable, physical reality of what she was doing. She was inside that massive, looming building with her affair partner. His name was Darren. The worst part of this entire situation wasn't the sudden, jarring shock of discovery. The absolute worst part was that the shock had worn off a long time ago. Jessica had no idea that I knew about Darren, but I did. I had known about him for months. Imagine waking up every single morning, making coffee, and looking across the kitchen island at the woman you pledged your life to, knowing with absolute certainty that she was actively choosing to give herself to someone else. It was a dark, heavy secret that had been gnawing at my soul, eating away at my sanity a little bit at a time, every single day. I carried it around like a lead weight in my chest, a constant, physical ache that made it hard to breathe. You might be asking yourself, Liam, why on earth didn't you just kick down the hotel room door? Why didn't you confront her the second you found out months ago? It's a fair question. When you watch movies or read stories about infidelity, the betrayed spouse always acts immediately. There's righteous shouting, clothes thrown out of second-story windows, and dramatic, empowering exits. But real life is so much messier, and human psychology is incredibly fragile. A man can only take what he can take. For a long time, my capacity for confrontation was absolutely zero. I was paralyzed by the terrifying prospect of dismantling my entire life. I loved her, and the thought of signing divorce papers and starting over was so daunting that I chose willful blindness. So for months, I looked the other way. I sat in that cold car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned bone white, staring up at the rows of illuminated windows. I tortured myself by imagining them up there. I imagined the laughter, the intimacy, and the complete, casual disregard for the vows Jessica and I had taken. I had desperately tried to convince myself that if I just waited it out, maybe the affair would run its natural course. I wanted to believe that Darren was just a fleeting distraction, a terrible mistake that she would eventually feel deeply guilty about and end on her own. I was frantically holding onto the crumbling illusion of our relationship, terrified of the gaping void that would replace it if I finally admitted it was over. But sitting there outside the Hilton, bathed in the neon light of my own ruined marriage, the crushing reality finally began to set in. She wasn't ending it. The affair wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a conscious, repeated choice she was making week after week. And as I stared at the hotel entrance, waiting to see if she would walk out, I realized that the most twisted part of it all wasn't just what she was doing behind closed doors with Darren. It was the sickening, perfectly crafted performance she put on the second she walked back through our front door. The drive back to our house in the suburbs that Thursday night was a blur of highway lights and blinding rain. I had sat outside the Hilton for nearly 2 hours before the sheer, freezing reality of my situation forced me to put the car in drive and flee the scene. I needed to beat her home. I needed to be sitting on the couch, pretending to watch ESPN or reading a book, carefully assembling my own mask before she walked through the front door wearing hers. You see, the most agonizing aspect of discovering your spouse is having an affair isn't the physical act of their infidelity. It is the terrifying psychological realization that the person you share a bed with, the person you trust more than anyone else on the planet, is capable of looking you dead in the eyes and lying with the effortless ease of a seasoned sociopath. It destroys your entire perception of reality. If she could lie about where she was on a Thursday night, what else was a lie? Was her laugh a lie? Was her affection a lie? Was our entire decade-long history just a beautifully constructed stage play? I pulled into our driveway, parked the car, and walked into our quiet, dark house. It smelled like the expensive vanilla candle she always kept burning in the entryway. The living room was perfectly organized, adorned with framed photos of our wedding, our vacations, and our smiling faces. It was a museum dedicated to a dead relationship. I poured myself 2 fingers of cheap bourbon, my hands shaking so violently the glass clinked against the bottle, and sat down on the living room sofa. Exactly 45 minutes later, the familiar hum of the garage door opener vibrated through the floorboards. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sickening, frantic rhythm that made me feel like I was going to throw up. I took a deep breath, swallowed the rest of the burning bourbon, and picked up the television remote, fixing my eyes on the screen. The heavy door from the garage swung open and Jessica walked in. She looked absolutely radiant. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair was slightly tousled but still beautiful, and she possessed this light, breezy energy that completely filled the room. If you didn't know any better, you would think she had just returned from a refreshing yoga class or a great evening catching up with her girlfriends. But I knew better. I knew exactly where she had been, and I knew exactly whose hands had been tangled in that tousled hair less than an hour ago. "Hey, babe," she called out cheerfully, slipping off her trench coat and hanging it in the closet. She walked into the living room, a soft, affectionate smile playing on her lips. She practically glided over to the sofa, leaned down, and kissed the top of my head. I had to force every single muscle in my body not to physically recoil. The scent of her expensive perfume was there, but beneath it, faintly clinging to her clothes, was the sterile, unmistakable scent of hotel soap. It took everything in me not to scream, not to grab her by the shoulders and demand to know how she could be so flawlessly, terrifyingly cruel. "Hey," I managed to say, my voice sounding tight and unnatural to my own ears. "How was the networking dinner?" That was her go-to excuse. She worked in marketing, a field that conveniently provided endless justifications for late-night dinners, extended happy hours, and weekend conferences. "Oh, same old corporate nonsense," she sighed dramatically, kicking off her heels and curling her legs up underneath her on the cushion beside me. She reached out and rested her hand gently on my knee. The touch felt like a physical burn. "Gary from accounts drank too much again, and the clients were just exhausting." I was honestly just sitting there, the whole time wishing I was back here on the couch with you. She looked me right in the eyes as she said it. She didn't blink. Her pupils didn't dilate with guilt. Her voice didn't waver. It was a masterclass in deception. "I'm glad you're home," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Me too," she smiled, giving my knee an affectionate squeeze. This was the double life. This was the sickening, perfectly crafted performance she put on the second she walked back through our front door. She didn't come home acting distant, cold, or mean. If she had been cruel, if she had picked fights or acted completely detached, it almost would have been easier to process. It would have made sense. But Jessica chose a much more sinister path. She overcompensated. She played the role of the perfect, caring, deeply invested wife to absolute perfection. She would cook my favorite meals on the weekends. She would leave little affectionate sticky notes on the bathroom mirror before she left for work. She would curl up against my chest while we watched movies, holding my hand and tracing circles on my palm. She was actively building the illusion of a flawless marriage while simultaneously burning its foundation to the ground. The absolute peak of this psychological torture occurred the following Sunday morning. We were sitting at the kitchen island, drinking coffee and eating bagels. The morning sun was streaming through the bay windows, casting a warm, idyllic glow over the room. It was the picture of suburban domestic bliss. Jessica reached over to the counter, pulled a thick, glossy folder toward her, and slid it across the marble island until it rested in front of me. "So I was thinking," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "I know we've been putting it off, but I really think we should pull the trigger on the kitchen remodel this spring." I stared down at the folder. It was filled with paint swatches, cabinet hardware catalogs, and printouts of high-end stainless steel appliances. "The kitchen," I echoed, my brain struggling to bridge the agonizing gap between the woman enthusiastically pointing at quartz countertops and the woman I had tracked to a hotel room 3 days prior. "Yeah." She nodded eagerly. "Look, I found these amazing shaker cabinets." And I was thinking we could finally knock down that dividing wall to open up the space into the dining room. It would be so perfect for when we host Thanksgiving next year. Plus, if we ever decide to. She paused, offering a soft, shy, perfectly calibrated smile. If we ever decide to start trying for kids in the next year or two, an open floor plan is much better for keeping an eye on a toddler. I felt the blood completely drain from my face. She was talking about our future. She was looking me in the eye, casually laying out a 5-year plan that included expensive home renovations, hosting family holidays, and bringing children into the world, all while she was actively sleeping with Darren Ranger. It was all a load of crap. Every single word spilling out of her beautiful mouth was a calculated, deliberate lie designed to keep me pacified and oblivious. She didn't mean any of it. She was spinning a web of fake future plans to ensure her safety net remained firmly in place while she went out and sought her cheap thrills. She wanted the stability, the dual income, and the respectable social status of our marriage, but she also wanted the adrenaline and the validation of her affair. She thought she was a genius. She thought she had constructed a foolproof system where she could have everything she wanted, completely insulated from consequence. "I don't know, Jess," I mumbled, staring blankly at a swatch of slate-gray paint. "A remodel is a huge commitment. We have to be sure it's what we really want." "I am sure, Liam," she said softly, reaching across the island to cover my hand with hers. "I want to build a beautiful life here with you. I want our home to be perfect for us." I sat there, looking at her hand resting on mine. I listened to her honey-sweet lies, feeling a profound, terrifying darkness expand in my chest. I nodded, forced a stiff smile, and told her the cabinets looked great. I was participating in my own psychological destruction, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of what it would take to tear the mask off her face and burn the theater to the ground. But as I sat there, listening to her excitedly describe the benefits of a farmhouse sink, a new, agonizing question began to echo in my mind, a question that would completely consume me in the dark, silent months that followed. What did I do wrong? That was the agonizing, inescapable question that began to loop in my mind like a broken record, playing on repeat every single hour of the day. As I sat there in the kitchen, nodding along to Jessica's enthusiastic plans for a farmhouse sink and an open-concept dining room, I was internally disintegrating. When you discover that your partner is cheating, society conditions you to immediately point the finger of blame entirely at them. You are supposed to label them a monster, pack your bags, and walk away with your head held high in righteous indignation. But the human heart is rarely that logical, and the immediate aftermath of betrayal is rarely that clean. Instead of furious anger, the very first emotion that completely swallowed me was a suffocating, deeply humiliating sense of inadequacy. I didn't look at Jessica and see a villain. I looked in the mirror and saw a failure. I dissected our marriage with the cold, clinical precision of a coroner performing an autopsy. I lay awake at night, staring up at the shifting shadows on our bedroom ceiling, listening to the soft, steady rhythm of her breathing beside me, and I analyzed every single interaction we had shared over the past 2 years. Had I stopped complimenting her enough? Was I working too many hours at the firm? Had our conversations grown too predictable, too steeped in the mundane logistics of bills and mortgage payments? And then, inevitably, my mind would drift to the darkest, most agonizing corner of the male ego, the physical aspect. I tortured myself by comparing the ghost of Darren Ranger to my own reflection. Was he in better shape? Was he more passionate, more adventurous, more capable of giving her whatever thrill it was she so desperately needed? I convinced myself that I must have been lacking something fundamental. I told myself that a woman doesn't just walk out of a comfortable, loving home and into a downtown hotel room unless she is starving for something she isn't getting. This toxic cocktail of self-blame and profound insecurity birthed the most pathetic, destructive phase of my entire ordeal, the denial. I decided to look the other way. It sounds absurd saying it out loud now. It sounds weak, but fear is a powerful, paralyzing narcotic. The thought of confronting her, of watching the beautiful, comfortable life we had built instantly shatter into a million irreparable pieces, was simply too terrifying to bear. I wasn't ready to lose my wife. I wasn't ready to divide our assets, list our home, explain our failure to our families, and step out into the cold, empty void of a divorced life. So I engaged in a desperate, psychological bargaining process. I convinced myself that this affair with Darren was just a phase, a midlife crisis, a temporary, reckless indiscretion that she just needed to get out of her system. I rationalized her behavior with staggering mental gymnastics. I told myself that maybe the stress of her demanding marketing job had pushed her to seek a mindless escape. I thought, if I just ride out the storm, if I just remain the steady, dependable husband I have always been, she will eventually wake up. She will realize that Darren is just a cheap thrill, a fleeting high, and she will quietly end it and come back to me. For 3 agonizing months, I lived in this self-imposed purgatory. I became an active participant in the theater of my own deception. My daily routine became an exercise in psychological endurance. I would wake up, make the coffee, and kiss her goodbye as she headed off to work. On the days she claimed she had networking dinners or late client meetings, I knew exactly where she was going. My chest would tighten, a cold sweat would prickle at the back of my neck, but I would simply smile, tell her to have a great time, and wish her luck. Then the waiting would begin. I would sit alone in our quiet suburban house as the Albany winter raged outside, listening to the sleet tap against the window panes. I would watch the clock on the mantel slowly tick by. 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Every passing minute was a physical blow, another reminder of exactly what she was doing and who she was doing it with. I stopped eating. The constant, churning anxiety in my stomach made the thought of food entirely nauseating. I lost 15 pounds in those 3 months, my clothes hanging loose on my frame, the dark circles under my eyes growing deeper by the day. Jessica, wrapped up in the intoxicating fog of her own double life, barely even noticed my physical deterioration, or if she did, she conveniently chalked it up to stress at the office. When she would finally come home from her nights with Darren, I had to execute my role flawlessly. I would pretend to be half asleep on the couch, or I would be sitting up reading a book, offering a tired but loving smile. "You're home late," I would say softly. "I know, I'm so sorry, babe." The client just would not stop talking, she would reply, offering that flawless practice sigh of exhaustion as she leaned down to kiss my cheek. Then came the hardest part of all, lying in bed next to her. She would shower, washing away the scent of the hotel, and slide under the covers next to me. She would reach out in the darkness, seeking the warmth and comfort of her husband, resting her head on my chest. I would lie there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the familiar weight of her body against mine. My mind would scream at me to push her away, to turn on the bedside lamp and demand the truth. But the fear of the void always won. I would wrap my arm around her, pull her close, and whisper, "I love you." "I love you too, Liam," she would murmur back, her voice thick with sleep, completely unaware that I was internally bleeding to death. But hope is a finite resource, and living in a state of constant, suffocating denial is entirely unsustainable. As the months dragged on, the fragile illusion I was desperately clinging to began to buckle under the weight of reality. I realized that Jessica wasn't sweating out a sickness. The affair wasn't naturally fizzling out as the initial thrill faded. In fact, it was escalating. The networking dinners became more frequent. The weekend company retreats began to pop up on our shared calendar. The text messages on her phone, which she guarded with the hypervigilant paranoia of a nuclear launch code, were constant, vibrating at all hours of the night. She wasn't getting it out of her system. She had integrated it into her system. Darren wasn't a mistake. He was a fundamental part of her new lifestyle. She had successfully compartmentalized her life into 2 distinct spheres: the safe, respectable, financially secure domestic sphere with me, and the thrilling, passionate, secretive sphere with him. And she had absolutely no intention of ever giving up either one. The turning point didn't arrive with a dramatic confrontation or a newly discovered piece of evidence. It arrived with a quiet, devastating moment of clarity on a mundane Tuesday evening. I was sitting in the living room, watching the local news, while Jessica was sitting on the adjacent armchair, scrolling through her phone. I watched her face. She was completely engrossed in her screen. A slow, genuine, radiant smile spread across her lips, a smile that was entirely unguarded, a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. It was the kind of smile she used to give me when we first started dating. She wasn't smiling at a funny meme or a text from her mother. She was smiling at him. In that exact moment, the heavy, suffocating fog of denial completely lifted from my brain. I stopped asking myself what I had done wrong. I stopped wondering what I was lacking. The truth was violently clear. It wasn't about my inadequacies, it was about her insatiable greed. I could have been the perfect husband, a billionaire, a fitness model, and a saint all rolled into one, and it still wouldn't have been enough because Jessica was fundamentally broken. She possessed a void inside her that required constant, novel validation, and she was willing to sacrifice my sanity to fill it. I looked at her, bathed in the soft blue light of her smartphone, and the last remaining shreds of my love for her quietly evaporated into thin air. The victim died right there on that sofa, and a profound, terrifying resolve was born in its place. The waiting game was officially over. The morning after that Tuesday evening revelation, I woke up long before the sun had even thought about rising over Albany. For the first time in 3 agonizing months, my chest didn't feel like it was being crushed in a vice. The suffocating, toxic fog of denial that had kept me paralyzed and compliant had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, clinical, and terrifyingly absolute clarity. I lay perfectly still on my side of the bed, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the woman sleeping next to me. I looked at Jessica's face, softened by sleep, her dark hair fanned out across the white pillowcase. Just 24 hours earlier, that sight would have sent a sharp, pathetic pang of longing and inadequacy straight through my heart. I would have wondered, for the 1000th time, why I wasn't enough for her. But now, in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, I felt absolutely nothing. The love, the fear, the desperate bargaining, it was all gone. She had taken my devotion, placed it on an altar of her own vanity, and set it on fire. The man who had been willing to sit in the ashes and pretend it was just a warm hearth was dead. I carefully slipped out of bed, went downstairs, and began to execute my exit strategy. When you finally decide to stop being a victim, the logistics of ending a marriage become surprisingly straightforward. I didn't want a messy, screaming, emotionally exhausting, drawn-out war. I wanted a surgical extraction. I called in sick to work that day, the first time I had done so in 5 years, and spent the next 8 hours meticulously dismantling the financial and administrative infrastructure of our shared life. I sat at the kitchen island, the very same spot where she had confidently lied to my face about an open-concept remodel just days prior, and I opened my laptop. I audited everything. I combed through our joint bank accounts and credit card statements. Once I stopped making excuses for her, the evidence of her double life was glaringly obvious, hidden in plain sight. There were the charges for expensive lunches downtown, the suspiciously frequent Uber receipts late at night, and the subtle, steady drain of cash she used to cover her tracks at the Hilton. I compiled it all into a meticulously organized digital dossier. By noon, I was sitting in the sterile, mahogany-paneled office of a highly recommended family law attorney named Robert. He was a veteran of the divorce courts, a man who possessed the kind of ruthless, emotionless efficiency I desperately needed. "I don't want counseling, I don't want a trial separation, and I don't want a mediator," I told Robert, sliding the printed dossier of financial evidence across his desk. "My wife is maintaining an active, ongoing affair. She believes I am completely oblivious. I want a petition for dissolution of marriage drafted immediately. We have no children. I want to protect my retirement, secure the equity in the house, and sever all financial ties as quickly and aggressively as the law allows." Robert flipped through the pages, his expression entirely impassive. "When one party is caught completely off guard, they tend to react poorly," he advised, looking up over his reading glasses. "She will likely try to drain joint accounts or manufacture leverage to negotiate a better settlement for herself." "Then we freeze the accounts," I countered, my voice as hard as ice. "I want temporary financial injunctions filed the second she is served. She thought she was playing a game with a blind man. I want to show her exactly how well I can see." Robert drafted the papers that very afternoon. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the perfect moment to spring it. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, on a Thursday evening, the familiar pattern reemerged. Jessica came downstairs from the master bathroom, dressed in a sleek, tailored black dress, her makeup completely flawless. The heavy, sweet scent of her perfume filled the hallway as she grabbed her trench coat from the closet. "Hey, babe," she said, her voice dropping into that perfectly calibrated, sympathetic tone she always used when she was preparing to lie to my face. "I am so sorry, but Gary from the office just texted me. The client wants to do a last-minute dinner meeting downtown to go over the new quarterly campaign. I'm probably going to be really late. Please don't wait up for me." She leaned in to kiss my cheek, but I subtly shifted my weight, stepping just out of her reach. Her lips caught empty air. She blinked, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing her beautiful features. "Everything okay, Liam?" "A client meeting," I repeated, my voice perfectly flat, stripping away every ounce of the warm, supportive husband persona I had maintained for years. "Where is the dinner?" Downtown. Just a bistro near the Capitol," she stammered slightly, clearly unsettled by my sudden shift in demeanor, but still arrogantly confident in her own deception. "It's super boring, I promise." "Are you sure it isn't at the Hilton?" I asked, the air in the hallway instantly plummeted to sub-zero. The color completely drained from Jessica's face in a fraction of a second, leaving her looking sickly and pale beneath her expensive foundation. Her eyes widened, darting frantically across my face, searching for a trace of a joke, a misunderstanding, anything that could give her an out. The Hilton," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What are you talking about? And are you sure the client's name isn't Darren Ranger?" I continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I spoke with a quiet, lethal authority that completely shattered the walls of her perfectly constructed theater. "Because if you're going to go to the Hilton with Darren, you should probably just tell him to clear out some drawer space for you." "Liam, no, wait, you're crazy, I don't know who," she started, her survival instincts kicking in as she immediately reached for the gaslight. I didn't let her finish. I reached over to the entryway console table, picked up the thick, heavy manila envelope containing the divorce petition, and dropped it onto the floor directly at her feet. It hit the hardwood with a loud, definitive smack. "I've known for months, Jessica," I said, watching her carefully constructed facade spontaneously combust. "I know about the hotel rooms. I know about the late-night texts. I know that every single word that has come out of your mouth since the summer has been an absolute sickening lie." "No, no, no, please," she gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as the undeniable reality of the envelope registered in her brain. The breezy, untouchable woman vanished, instantly replaced by a frantic, hyperventilating stranger. She fell to her knees on the hardwood floor, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face, grabbing at the fabric of my jeans. "Liam, please, it was a mistake. It meant absolutely nothing. I love you." I was going to end it. It was a masterful performance, but I was no longer a willing audience member. "Don't insult my intelligence by calling a sustained, months-long double life a mistake," I snapped, stepping back forcefully so her hands fell empty to the floor. "A mistake is forgetting to pay a utility bill. You made a conscious, deliberate choice to disrespect our marriage every single time you unbuttoned that dress for another man. You looked me in the eye and planned a fake kitchen remodel just to keep your safety net intact. You are a coward, and you are a fraud. Please don't do this." She sobbed, the tears ruining her flawless makeup, her voice echoing shrilly in the high-ceilinged entryway. "I'll do anything. We can go to therapy. I'll quit my job. Don't throw away 10 years of marriage." "I didn't throw it away, Jessica," I replied, staring down at her with a profound, unshakable disgust. "You set it on fire, and I am just finally walking out of the burning building. The joint accounts are frozen. My lawyer's number is on the first page of that packet. I suggest you call Darren and see if he's willing to pay your retainer, because I will not spend another dime on you." I turned my back on her, grabbed my car keys from the hook, and walked out the front door into the crisp Albany night. I left her weeping on the floor in the ruins of the life she had destroyed. As I started my car and pulled out of the driveway, my hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't tight. I had finally pulled the plug, and as the house disappeared in my rearview mirror, all I felt was the exhilarating, terrifying rush of total freedom. The drive away from my house that Thursday night was supposed to feel like a triumphant movie scene. I had executed my exit strategy flawlessly. I had dropped the ultimate mic, completely shattered Jessica's sickening double life, and left her weeping on the hardwood floor with frozen bank accounts and a divorce petition. By all cinematic standards, I should have been blasting rock music with the windows down, celebrating my liberation. But real life doesn't have a soundtrack, and the human brain doesn't instantly heal just because you did the right thing. As I pulled into the parking garage of an extended-stay business hotel downtown, the adrenaline that had fueled my confrontation began to crash, leaving behind a cold, hollow crater in my chest. I carried my suitcase into the sterile, unfamiliar room, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the mattress. The silence was absolute and deafening. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't going to wake up next to my wife. I wasn't going to smell her vanilla candle in the hallway, and I wasn't going to hear her voice asking me how my day was. Even when a relationship is toxic, even when it is built on a foundation of breathtaking lies, it still occupies a massive amount of real estate in your brain. Removing it leaves a terrifying, gaping void. That first night in the hotel and the weeks that immediately followed were a masterclass in psychological agony. The legal proceedings were remarkably swift, thanks entirely to Robert, my ruthless family law attorney. Because I had secured irrefutable financial evidence of Jessica's affair, and because we had no children to complicate the custody courts, the dissolution of our marriage was a cold, administrative transaction. Jessica, of course, did not go quietly. Stripped of her safety net and her leverage, she panicked. She bombarded my phone with hundreds of voicemails, ranging from desperate, sobbing apologies to vicious, hateful accusations, desperately trying to elicit any kind of emotional reaction from me. She tried to deploy her friends to guilt-trip me. She even tried to show up at my office, but I had already instructed building security to revoke her access. I never spoke a single word to her again. I let Robert handle every email, every asset division, and every pathetic attempt she made to negotiate. We sold the suburban house, the house she had so eagerly planned to remodel while sleeping with Darren. The equity was split, the retirement accounts were divided according to the prenuptial guidelines, and just like that, a 10-year marriage was legally erased. I heard through the grapevine that Darren, realizing Jessica was no longer a low-stakes, fun fling, but rather a divorced woman with a mountain of emotional baggage and a newly downgraded lifestyle, dumped her shortly after the house was sold. I was officially free. I was single, unburdened, and financially secure. I rented a sleek, modern apartment closer to the downtown core, bought some new furniture, and tried to settle into my new reality. But the silence of that new apartment was unbearable. Without the constant, exhausting hypervigilance of monitoring Jessica's lies, my brain suddenly had nothing to do. The grief, the betrayal, and the lingering echoes of inadequacy began to creep back in. Every time I sat on my new couch, my mind would automatically replay the image of her text messages, the smell of the hotel soap, and the effortless way she had looked me in the eye and lied. I realized very quickly that if I stayed alone in that quiet apartment, the ghosts of my failed marriage were going to eat me alive. So I found a new addiction. I decided to bury myself alive in my work. I was a regional director for a mid-sized logistics and supply chain firm. It was a demanding, high-pressure environment that ran on tight deadlines, relentless client demands, and complex operational metrics. In the past, I had always maintained a healthy work-life balance, leaving the office at 5:00 p.m. so I could go home and play the role of the devoted husband. But with the husband role permanently retired, I took that devotion and funneled every single ounce of it into my job. My new routine was brutal, masochistic, and entirely deliberate. My alarm would go off at 4:30 a.m. By 5:15 a.m., I was sitting at my desk in the empty, dark office, the only light coming from the glow of my dual monitors. I would dive into the spreadsheets, the regional reports, and the client acquisition files with a manic, obsessive intensity. When the rest of the staff arrived at 8:00 a.m., I had already accomplished a full day's work. But I didn't stop. I took on every extra project the executives threw my way. I volunteered to handle the most difficult, hostile client accounts. I skipped lunches, surviving entirely on lukewarm black coffee, stale protein bars from the breakroom vending machine, and pure, unfiltered adrenaline. When 5:00 p.m. rolled around and the office emptied out, I stayed. I would sit there as the city lights clicked on outside my window, working through the evening, the night, and often into the early hours of the morning. I was pulling 18-hour shifts 5, sometimes 6 days a week. It wasn't about the money, and it wasn't about climbing the corporate ladder. It was about exhaustion. I was using physical and mental burnout as an anesthetic. I knew that if I worked until my eyes blurred and my brain completely short-circuited, I wouldn't have the mental bandwidth to think about Jessica. If I pushed my body to the absolute limit of human endurance, I would be so catastrophically tired by the time I finally unlocked the door to my apartment at midnight that I would pass out the second my head hit the pillow. I wouldn't lie awake staring at the ceiling. I wouldn't dream about the Hilton. For almost 8 months, this was my entire existence. I was a ghost haunting my own life. I lost touch with my friends. I stopped going to the gym. My suits hung loosely on my frame, and my colleagues started casting worried, hushed glances my way in the break room. I was breaking regional sales records, my commission checks were massive, and the higher-ups were thrilled with my output, but internally I was a hollow, crumbling shell of a human being. The breaking point of this dark era didn't arrive with a dramatic collapse or a medical emergency, though I was certainly heading toward one. It arrived on a rainy Sunday morning in late November. I had woken up at 6:00 a.m., my body automatically conditioned to the grueling schedule, and I had dragged myself to the kitchen to start a pot of coffee before logging onto my laptop to review some supply chain manifests. I stood in front of the kitchen sink, waiting for the coffee machine to beep, and I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the dark glass of the microwave. I barely recognized the man staring back at me. My face was pale and gaunt. The dark, heavy bags under my eyes made me look 10 years older than I actually was. I looked miserable. I looked like a victim. A profound, sickening realization washed over me. I thought I had beaten Jessica. I thought that by handing her the divorce papers and walking away, I had won the war. But looking at my exhausted, withered reflection, I realized she was still actively destroying my life, and I was holding the sledgehammer for her. She had taken 10 years of my youth, and now I was allowing the trauma of her betrayal to steal my present. I was sacrificing my health, my happiness, and my future just to avoid feeling the pain she caused. I am letting her kill me, I thought, the absolute absurdity of the situation finally piercing through the exhaustion. I reached out and turned off the coffee machine. I walked over to the kitchen island, closed my laptop, and shoved it into a drawer. I walked into the bathroom, turned the shower on as hot as I could stand it, and stood under the scalding water for nearly an hour, letting the physical and emotional grime of the last 8 months wash down the drain. When I stepped out, the manic, desperate need to numb myself was gone. The pain of the divorce was still there, but instead of running from it, I was finally ready to look it in the eye and process it. I didn't log on for the rest of the weekend. The following Monday, I walked into my boss's office, handed him a revised schedule, and informed him that my 18-hour days were officially over. I started leaving the office at 5:00 p.m. again. I forced myself to sit in the quiet of my apartment and actually feel the discomfort. I started cooking actual meals instead of eating vending machine garbage. I reconnected with the friends I had ignored, and I slowly, painstakingly began the hard work of rebuilding my self-worth from the ground up. I was pulling myself out of the dark era, piece by piece. I didn't know it at the time, but the universe was just waiting for me to finally clear the wreckage. Because just a few months after I stopped hiding behind my desk, I was going to meet a woman who would make every single second of that agonizing pain entirely worth it. To truly understand how spectacularly the scales of justice eventually balance themselves, we have to shift the lens. Because while Liam was pulling himself out of the darkest, most agonizing era of his life, I was completely unaware that I was about to walk into it. My name is Chloe. When I first met Liam, he was about a year out from the explosive Thursday night confrontation that had ended his marriage. He had successfully broken his addiction to 18-hour workdays and was actively trying to figure out how to exist as a normal human being again. We were introduced through a mutual friend at a casual weekend barbecue. I remember looking at him across the patio and noticing two things immediately. First, he was incredibly handsome with this quiet, grounded presence. And second, there was a profound, lingering exhaustion behind his eyes. He looked like a man who had survived a war and was still getting used to the silence of peacetime. Our first date was at a quiet, dimly lit coffee shop downtown. I had endured my fair share of the modern dating pool, a chaotic wasteland of men playing games, hiding their intentions, or presenting heavily curated fake versions of themselves. Liam was the exact opposite. He was radically, breathtakingly honest. Within the first hour of our date, he didn't try to impress me with a sanitized version of his past. He laid his cards entirely on the table. He told me about Jessica. He told me about the secret at the Hilton, the agonizing months of waiting, the perfectly executed exit strategy, and the dark, workaholic depression he had just crawled out of. He wasn't looking for pity, and he wasn't playing the victim. He simply looked me in the eye and said, "I have some baggage, but I am actively doing the work to unpack it. I value honesty above absolutely everything else, and I don't have the energy for games." I was instantly captivated. In a world full of people pretending to be perfect, Liam's vulnerability was the most attractive thing I had ever seen. Building a relationship with a man who has survived profound betrayal requires a tremendous amount of patience. For the first few months we dated, I could see the hypervigilance still hardwired into his nervous system. If I was running late from work, or if I sent a text message that was slightly shorter than usual, I could see the subtle tension tighten in his jaw. He was unconsciously waiting for the other shoe to drop. He was waiting for the mask to slip, because his ex-wife had taught him that the people who say, "I love you," the sweetest are often the ones hiding the darkest secrets. But I simply refused to give him a reason to doubt me. I didn't have a double life. If I told him I was going out with my girlfriends, I was actually going out with my girlfriends. If I was upset about something, I didn't put on a fake smile and act like the perfect, breezy partner. I sat him down and we talked about it like adults. Slowly but surely, I watched the walls around Liam's heart crumble. I watched the tension leave his shoulders. He realized that he didn't have to be a shock absorber for a narcissist anymore. He realized that a relationship could be a sanctuary, not a battlefield. Our life together became incredibly peaceful, filled with the kind of quiet, domestic joy that Jessica had only ever pretended to want. We spent our weekends taking long drives, exploring the upstate New York countryside, and dreaming about buying motorcycles to travel across the country. Liam's laugh, which his friends told me had completely disappeared during the last years of his marriage, returned loud and genuine. Integrating into his family was another beautiful revelation. Liam's family had watched him suffer through the betrayal and the subsequent depression, and they were fiercely protective of him. The most protective of all was his older sister, Sarah. Sarah is a force of nature. She is a woman who loves fiercely, speaks her mind without a filter, and possesses absolutely zero tolerance for nonsense. She had despised Jessica. Sarah had always sensed the superficial, transactional nature of Jessica's affection, but she had kept her mouth shut out of love for her brother. When the divorce happened, Sarah had been Liam's rock. When Liam introduced me to Sarah, she practically interrogated me. But once she realized that my intentions were pure, and once she saw the light and happiness return to her brother's eyes, Sarah and I became incredibly close. We were thick as thieves. To Liam's family, Jessica was completely dead to them. They never spoke her name. She was old news, a toxic chapter best forgot, and they welcomed me in as the massive, undeniable upgrade their son and brother deserved. 2 years after we met, Liam proposed. It wasn't a massive, performative spectacle designed for social media. It was quiet, intimate, and perfectly us. We got married in a beautiful, stress-free ceremony surrounded only by the people who genuinely knew and loved us. I thought our life couldn't possibly get any better, but the universe had one more incredible blessing in store for us. About a year into our marriage, Liam and I were sitting in a sterile, brightly lit ultrasound room at our local clinic. We had been trying to start a family, and the initial positive test had sent us both over the moon. But as the ultrasound technician dragged the wand across my stomach, she suddenly paused, smiled, and turned the monitor toward us. "Well," the technician laughed. "I hope you two have a lot of energy. There are 2 heartbeats in there. You're having twins." I gasped, my hands flying to my mouth. I turned to look at my husband. Liam was staring at the monitor, his eyes brimming with heavy, radiant tears. Fake future that his ex-wife had callously used to manipulate him, the promises of remodels and babies while she was actively sleeping with another man, was entirely gone. In its place was a beautiful, undeniable reality. He was going to be a father to 2 beautiful babies with a woman who adored the ground he walked on. As the pregnancy progressed, my belly grew to comical proportions. By my 7th month, I was massive, exhausted, and waddling everywhere I went, but I had never been happier. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Sarah called me. Liam was busy at the office tying up some loose ends before he took his paternity leave, and Sarah insisted that I could not wait another day to finalize the nursery. "I am picking you up in 20 minutes, Chloe," Sarah commanded through the phone. "We are going to the big baby furniture warehouse downtown. You need 2 cribs, a changing table, and God knows what else, and I am not letting my nieces and nephews sleep in a dresser drawer. Be ready." I laughed, threw on a comfortable maternity dress that actually managed to fit over my huge twin belly, and waited for her truck to pull into the driveway. I was just expecting a fun, exhausting afternoon of shopping with my sister-in-law. I had absolutely no idea that the baby warehouse was located just a few blocks away from the very same Hilton Hotel where Liam's nightmare had begun years ago. And I certainly had no idea that we were about to walk directly into the ghost of my husband's past, setting the stage for the most satisfying encounter of my entire life. Let me tell you, carrying twins is an entirely different level of human endurance. By the time I hit my 7th month of pregnancy, I felt less like a glowing, expectant mother, and more like a heavily armored, slow-moving transport vehicle. My center of gravity had completely shifted, my ankles were permanently swollen, and the simple act of putting on my own shoes required strategic planning and a pep talk. But despite the physical exhaustion, I was living in a state of absolute, profound euphoria. Liam was a revelation during the pregnancy. The man who had once buried himself in 18-hour workdays to escape the agonizing ghost of his past was now channeling all that intense focus into preparing for our future. He read every parenting book on the market, assembled strollers with the precision of an engineer, and spent his weekends meticulously painting the nursery a soft, calming sage green. The dark, hollow circles that used to sit under his eyes when we first met were permanently gone. He was vibrant, present, and so incredibly excited to be a father. He treated me like I was made of spun glass, refusing to let me lift anything heavier than a coffee mug. Because Liam was so fiercely protective, it was a rare occasion that I actually managed to get out of the house to run errands without him hovering over my shoulder. But on one crisp, bright Saturday morning in late October, duty called. Liam had to go into the regional office to finalize his handover protocols and client files ahead of his upcoming paternity leave. Enter Sarah. If Liam is the quiet, steady rock of his family, his older sister Sarah is the undeniable lightning storm. She is a woman who loves fiercely, speaks her mind with zero filter, and possesses the kind of terrifyingly efficient organizational skills that could probably run a small country. When Liam left for the office, Sarah immediately pulled into our driveway in her large SUV, armed with a clipboard, a tape measure, and a large iced coffee. "Get your coat, Mama," Sarah commanded, marching into my kitchen. "Liam is out of the house, which means we are officially breaking you out of your bubble wrap. We are going to the mega warehouse downtown to finalize the cribs, the changing table, and the glider. I am not letting my nieces and nephews sleep in a dresser drawer because my brother is too busy color-coordinating spreadsheets." I laughed, throwing on a comfortable, flowing maternity dress that actually managed to accommodate my massive twin bump, and waddled out to her truck. I was genuinely looking forward to it. I needed to get out of the house, and Sarah was always a guaranteed good time. We drove into downtown Albany, chatting animatedly about the nursery layout and baby names. I was just expecting a fun, albeit exhausting, afternoon of scanning barcodes and comparing the structural integrity of white oak versus mahogany. I had absolutely no idea that the massive baby furniture warehouse we were heading to was located just a few blocks away from the Hilton Hotel, the very same hotel where Liam's agonizing nightmare had begun all those years ago. And I certainly didn't know that the universe was actively aligning the stars to deliver the most poetic, intensely satisfying encounter of my entire life. The warehouse was enormous, a sprawling, multi-level maze of pastel fabrics, high-end nursery sets, and towering shelves of baby gear. We spent the first hour successfully navigating the infant car seat section before making our way toward the back of the store, where the premium nursery furniture was displayed in little staged room mock-ups. I was leaning heavily on the handle of our shopping cart, feeling the familiar, dull ache in my lower back, while Sarah marched slightly ahead of me, aggressively checking items off her clipboard. We turned the corner into aisle 14. Mid-step and mid-sentence, Sarah stopped. It wasn't a casual pause, it was an abrupt, rigid halt. Her spine snapped straight, her shoulders tensed, and the hand holding her clipboard gripped the plastic so tightly her knuckles instantly turned white. "Sarah," I asked, panting slightly as I caught up to her. "What is it?" "Did they run out of the matching dressers?" "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Sarah whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but the absolute, venomous disgust lacing her words made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The breezy, fun sister-in-law had instantly vanished. In her place was a fiercely protective, incredibly dangerous predator who had just spotted a threat to her family. I followed her gaze down the long, brightly lit aisle. About 30 feet away from us, standing in front of a display of expensive rocking chairs, was a woman. She was holding a small gift bag and a registry scanner, clearly shopping for a friend's baby shower. She was a brunette, wearing a tan coat and a pair of dark jeans. I had never seen her in person, and Liam had deleted every single photograph of her from his life years ago, but the sheer, suffocating tension radiating off Sarah told me exactly who she was. "Is that?" I started, my voice catching in my throat. "Jessica," Sarah hissed, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. My heart did a sudden, chaotic flip in my chest. This was the ghost. This was the architect of my husband's darkest era. This was the woman who had looked Liam dead in the eyes and fed him lies about future kitchen remodels and starting a family, all while secretly slipping off to a hotel room with another man. This was the woman who had stripped a good, decent man of his self-worth and left him a hollow, exhausted shell. I stared at her, feeling a complex, overwhelming rush of emotions. I expected to feel intimidated. I expected her to look like some untouchable, glamorous villain from a soap opera. But as I looked at her, all I saw was an ordinary woman. In fact, she looked incredibly tired. The radiant, breezy, golden girl aura that Liam had described from their early years together was completely gone. Her posture was slightly slumped as she stared blankly at a price tag. There was a dullness to her expression, the unmistakable wear and tear of a woman whose life had significantly downgraded since she threw away her safety net. She didn't look like a master manipulator. She looked like someone who had made a catastrophic, arrogant mistake and was still carrying the heavy, exhausting weight of the consequences. My immediate instinct, especially being heavily pregnant and emotionally vulnerable, was flight. I didn't want the drama. I didn't want the stress. I had my beautiful husband, I had my babies on the way, and I didn't need to engage with the toxic waste of his past. "Sarah," I whispered, reaching out to touch her arm. "Let's just turn the cart around. We can look at the cribs upstairs. Let's just go." Sarah didn't move an inch. She slowly lowered her clipboard, her eyes still locked on Jessica's back. "Absolutely not," Sarah replied, her voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register. "Sarah, please," I urged, feeling a spike of anxiety. "I don't want to cause a scene. Liam wouldn't want us to cause a scene." Sarah finally turned to look at me. Her expression was fiercely loving, but entirely unyielding. "Chloe, listen to me," Sarah said softly, her eyes blazing with absolute conviction. "For months, my brother sat in a dark apartment and punished himself for her sins. He hid from the world because she made him feel like he wasn't enough. We are not hiding from her. We don't shrink ourselves to make trash feel comfortable." Sarah's gaze dropped down to my massive, twin-filled belly, and a slow, brilliant, entirely ruthless smile spread across her face. "In fact," Sarah continued, her voice brightening with a sudden, vindictive cheerfulness, "I think it is incredibly rude not to say hello to old acquaintances. Follow my lead, Mama. We are going to go introduce ourselves." Before I could protest another word, Sarah grabbed the front of my shopping cart and began marching us directly down the center of aisle 14. The heavy, rhythmic squeak of the shopping cart wheels echoed sharply off the concrete floor, cutting through the quiet hum of the warehouse. The distance between us and the ghost of Liam's past closed in a matter of seconds. I took a deep breath, threw my shoulders back as best as I could, and braced myself. Jessica, hearing the approaching cart, casually turned around to step out of the way. Her eyes landed on Sarah first. I watched the exact moment the realization hit her. The color instantly, completely drained from Jessica's face. The registry scanner she was holding slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the base of a wooden rocking chair. Her mouth parted in a silent, breathless gasp of pure shock. But the true devastation didn't happen until her wide, terrified eyes slid past Sarah and finally landed directly on me. There is a phenomenon that occurs when human beings are subjected to sudden, catastrophic shock. Time dilates. The brain, unable to process the overwhelming influx of sensory data, forces the world into a brutal, agonizing slow motion. As I stood in the middle of aisle 14, my hands resting instinctively on my massive, twin-filled belly, I watched that exact phenomenon completely overtake the woman standing a few feet away from me. Jessica's eyes were locked onto my stomach. The heavy plastic registry scanner she had dropped was still clattering against the polished concrete floor, the sound echoing sharply through the quiet warehouse. She didn't need to ask who I was. Even though we had never formally met, the context clues were utterly undeniable. She was looking at Sarah, her ex-husband's fiercely protective, violently loyal sister. And then she was looking at me, a heavily pregnant woman standing firmly by Sarah's side. In the span of about 4 seconds, I watched Jessica's brain calculate the math, bridge the gap, and arrive at the devastating, soul-crushing conclusion. The woman who had destroyed my husband's life was staring directly at his new one. The color had completely drained from Jessica's face, leaving her skin a sickly, ashen gray beneath the harsh, fluorescent lights of the store. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her chest began to heave with short, shallow breaths as her eyes frantically darted from my face, down to my maternity dress and back up to Sarah. The arrogant, untouchable golden girl aura that she had weaponized for a decade was entirely absent. She looked small. She looked fragile. She looked like a woman who was suddenly realizing the sheer, terrifying magnitude of her own mistakes. Sarah, however, was an absolute masterclass in lethal composure. She didn't scream. She didn't launch into a bitter, expletive-filled tirade. She didn't cause the kind of chaotic, trashy scene that would have allowed Jessica to play the victim. Instead, Sarah weaponized politeness. She deployed a bright, cheerful, high-pitched tone that was so dripping with passive-aggressive venom, it could have stripped the paint off the expensive cribs surrounding us. "Jessica." Sarah beamed, her voice ringing out clearly in the quiet aisle. "Wow, what an incredibly small world. It has been an absolute minute, hasn't it? What are the odds of running into you right down the street from the Hilton?" Jessica physically flinched. The mention of the hotel, the exact location of her sickening affair, the physical monument to her betrayal, hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. She took a half step backward, her knuckles turning white as she clutched the cheap little gift bag she had been holding. Sarah," Jessica stammered, her voice sounding like dry sand. "Hi, I didn't expect to see you here." "Oh, I'm sure you didn't," Sarah smiled, taking a deliberate step forward and pulling me gently along with her. "But you know how it is. Life just moves so incredibly fast when you aren't weighed down by dead weight. Anyway, I don't believe you two have ever been properly introduced." Sarah turned to me, placing a warm, affectionate hand on my shoulder before locking her piercing gaze back onto her former sister-in-law. "Jessica, this is Chloe," Sarah announced, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. "She is Liam's wife." The word wife hung in the air like a guillotine blade that had just been dropped. Jessica's eyes snapped to my face. I didn't glare at her and I didn't shrink away. I simply stood my ground, rested my hand on my belly, and offered her a polite, entirely indifferent smile. "It's nice to meet you, Jessica," I said mildly. "Hi," she choked out. She couldn't maintain eye contact with me for more than a second. Her gaze was magnetically, agonizingly drawn back down to my stomach. She was staring at the physical embodiment of the fake future she had once arrogantly dangled in front of my husband. I remembered Liam telling me about that Sunday morning in their old kitchen, when Jessica had looked him in the eye and happily discussed tearing down walls to make room for a toddler, all while actively planning her next hotel rendezvous with Darren. Now, years later, she was standing in a baby furniture warehouse, completely alone, holding a scanner for someone else's registry, while staring at the woman who was actually living the beautiful, authentic reality she had thrown away. Sarah, realizing she had her foot firmly on the throat of the situation, decided to apply the final, crushing pounds of pressure. "Yes, we are just out running some weekend errands," Sarah continued brightly, gesturing broadly to the massive display of premium nursery sets. "We're shopping for baby furniture today. We actually have to buy two of absolutely everything because Chloe is pregnant with twins." A microscopic, strangled gasp escaped Jessica's lips. "Twins." "Boy and a girl," Sarah chirped, practically glowing with vindictive triumph. "Liam is just completely over the moon. He's at the regional office today finalizing his massive promotion so he can take his extended paternity leave. He spent the entire weekend painting the nursery in their beautiful new house. Honestly, Jessica, I have never seen my brother so deeply, genuinely happy. It's like he finally has the life he always deserved." Every single sentence out of Sarah's mouth was a precision-guided missile aimed directly at Jessica's deepest regrets. Massive promotion, beautiful new house, deeply, genuinely happy. Sarah was meticulously painting a picture of a man who hadn't just survived a betrayal, but who had spectacularly upgraded his existence the absolute second the toxic tumor was removed from his life. I watched a single, heavy tear spill over Jessica's lower lash line and cut a track through her pale makeup. She wasn't crying because she was happy for us. She was crying because the absolute, suffocating reality of her own downgrade had just been shoved directly into her face. She had traded a fiercely loyal, hardworking husband and a comfortable life for a cheap, temporary thrill with a man who had dumped her the second things got complicated. She thought she was the main character, the untouchable prize who could have her cake and eat it too. Instead, she had rendered herself completely irrelevant. That's wonderful," Jessica whispered, her voice breaking entirely. She looked down at the floor, unable to bear the weight of her own humiliation a second longer. Tell Liam congratulations for me." "Oh, I wouldn't dream of ruining his weekend by mentioning your name," Sarah replied sweetly, her smile never wavering. "He's much too busy building a real family to worry about ancient history." Right at that moment, as if responding to the sheer, triumphant energy of the encounter, one of the twins delivered a sharp, pronounced kick against my ribs. I smiled, patting my stomach. I realized in that second that I didn't hold an ounce of anger toward the weeping woman standing in front of me. I didn't need to yell at her for hurting the man I loved, because her current reality was a far worse punishment than anything I could have ever said. "Well, we have a premium mahogany double crib set to pick out," Sarah announced, giving her clipboard a definitive tap. "We better get moving before my feet swell up. Have a great day shopping for, whatever that is, Jessica." Sarah gently linked her arm through mine, seamlessly pivoted the shopping cart, and guided us right past her. We didn't look back. We walked down the aisle, the squeak of the cart wheels resuming their steady rhythm, leaving Jessica standing completely frozen in the middle of the warehouse. As we turned the corner toward the checkout registers, I risked one final glance over my shoulder. Jessica had dropped to her knees in the middle of the display, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, heaving sobs. She was surrounded by the soft pastel blankets, the rocking chairs, and the beautiful wooden cribs, a permanent, mocking monument to the life she could have had, if only she hadn't been so arrogantly convinced that she was smarter than the man who loved her. Sarah let out a long, heavy exhale as we cleared the aisle, her fierce posture finally relaxing. She looked over at me, a massive, genuine grin breaking across her face. "Well," Sarah muttered under her breath, tossing her iced coffee cup into a nearby trash can, "that was better than therapy." I couldn't help it. I threw my head back and laughed. It was a loud, joyful sound that echoed through the warehouse. The ghost was officially exorcised. The dark era was permanently closed. We paid for the mahogany cribs, loaded them into the back of Sarah's truck, and drove back toward the beautiful, completely drama-free sanctuary that my husband had built for us. The universe had taken its time, but it had finally, beautifully balanced the scales. Stepping out of the heavy, artificially lit atmosphere of the baby furniture warehouse and into the crisp, biting afternoon air of upstate New York felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath underwater. The sudden, chaotic spike of adrenaline that had flooded my system during our encounter in aisle 14 was slowly beginning to recede, leaving me with a strange, floating sense of profound relief. Two young warehouse employees helped us wheel the massive, flat-packed boxes containing the double mahogany cribs out to the parking lot. Sarah supervised the loading process with the strategic precision of a military general, ensuring every box was perfectly secured in the bed of her SUV. When the heavy tailgate finally slammed shut with a satisfying metallic thud, Sarah dusted off her hands, turned to me and flashed a brilliant, entirely unrepentant smile. "Well, Mama," she said, pulling her keys from her purse, "I think that was a highly productive shopping trip, but the twins are probably starving after all that excitement. You want to go grab a late lunch?" "I think I need a milkshake," I admitted, resting a hand on my stomach as the babies settled down from their earlier acrobatics. "A very large chocolate milkshake." "Your wish is my command," Sarah laughed. We drove a few miles away from the warehouse district and pulled into the parking lot of a classic, nostalgic Albany diner, the kind of place with faded neon signs, checkered vinyl booths, and the permanent, comforting smell of brewing coffee and frying bacon. We slid into a corner booth by the window, shedding our coats. I ordered my chocolate milkshake and a plate of fries, while Sarah ordered a club sandwich and a fresh cup of coffee. For a few minutes, we just sat in the comfortable noise of the diner. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of other patrons, and the upbeat rhythm of the jukebox completely grounded me back in reality. Sarah took a long sip of her coffee, set the mug down, and looked across the table at me, her fierce, protective eyes softening into absolute warmth. "You handled that like an absolute queen, Chloe," she said quietly. "I know I kind of ambushed you by marching us down that aisle, and I'm sorry if I spiked your blood pressure. But I couldn't let her just stand there without knowing exactly what she threw away." "I was terrified for the first 3 seconds," I admitted, tracing a water ring on the Formica tabletop. I had spent the last 2 years building up this image of Jessica in my head. I thought she was this untouchable, glamorous mastermind, but looking at her today, she just looked broken, Sarah. She looked so sad. Sarah scoffed, a dark, humorless chuckle escaping her chest. "Don't waste a single ounce of your empathy on her, sweetie. She isn't sad because she broke my brother's heart. She is sad because she got caught, and because the grass on the other side of the fence turned out to be a swamp." The waitress arrived, setting down my massive milkshake and our plates of food. I dipped a fry into the chocolate, a bizarre pregnancy craving that Liam always lovingly teased me about, and looked back at Sarah. "What actually happened to her after the divorce?" I asked softly. "Liam told me about the night he left the papers, and he told me that her affair partner dumped her, but he never really talks about the fallout. He just completely closed the book." "Liam closed the book because he is a good man who doesn't feed on drama," Sarah explained, leaning forward, resting her forearms on the table. "But the rest of the family." We watched the entire sequel play out, and let me tell you, it was a spectacular train wreck. When Liam froze the accounts and walked out, Jessica's entire reality shattered, Sarah began, spilling the unvarnished tea with a mixture of disgust and vindication. "She thought she was so incredibly smart. She thought she was the main character in a movie, entitled to the safe, wealthy husband at home and the thrilling romance at the Hilton. When she realized Liam wasn't going to play the pathetic, forgiving victim, she completely panicked. She immediately tried to control the narrative in our social circles," Sarah continued. She started calling mutual friends, crying hysterically, trying to spin this story that Liam was cold, distant, and that they had just drifted apart. But Liam's lawyer had all the receipts. The truth about Darren and the hotel rooms leaked out into the Albany rumor mill in about 48 hours. Suddenly, the golden couple facade was dead, and Jessica was completely exposed as a fraud. I listened intently, sipping my milkshake, finally understanding the sheer magnitude of the social and financial downgrade Jessica had inflicted upon herself. "And Darren?" I asked. "Darren was the ultimate punchline," Sarah smirked. Darren liked Jessica when she was a fun, low-stakes secret. He liked the adrenaline of sneaking around. But the second she showed up at his door, weeping, carrying a mountain of luggage, a pending divorce, and frozen bank accounts, he bolted. He ghosted her within weeks. She blew up a 10-year marriage for a guy who wouldn't even let her keep a toothbrush in his bathroom. Sarah shook her head, taking a bite of her sandwich. She had to sell the house she loved. She had to move into a tiny, overpriced apartment. She lost her social standing, she lost the respect of her peers, and she lost the only man who ever truly put her first. She tried to reach out to my parents a few times, playing the victim, begging for them to talk to Liam for her. My mother hung up on her. The image of Jessica standing alone in the warehouse, holding a scanner for someone else's baby registry, suddenly made perfect, devastating sense. She was living in the cold, isolated ruins of her own arrogance. "I'm glad she's out of his life," I whispered, "but hearing about it just makes me realize how much pain Liam was actually in. He never lets it show now." Sarah's fierce demeanor instantly melted away. Her eyes filled with a sudden, heavy emotion, and she reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "Chloe, you didn't know him during the dark era," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a thick, emotional whisper. "After the divorce, my brother became a ghost. He punished himself for her sins. He worked 18-hour days because he was terrified of the silence in his own head. My parents and we were terrified we were going to lose him. We watched the light completely die in his eyes, and there was absolutely nothing we could do to fix it, because the damage she did to his self-worth was so profound." A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek, and she quickly brushed it away with her free hand. "And then he met you," Sarah smiled, giving my hand a tight, affectionate squeeze. "You didn't just give him his smile back, Chloe. You gave him his life back. You showed him that love doesn't have to be a performance and that a partner isn't supposed to be a parasite. The reason my family loves you so fiercely isn't just because you're a wonderful person. It's because you saved him." I felt the tears well up in my own eyes, a warm, overwhelming wave of gratitude washing over my entire body. I squeezed her hand back, unable to find the words for a moment. "He saved me too," I finally managed to say, a watery laugh escaping my lips. "I love him more than anything." "And that is exactly why I wanted her to see you today," Sarah said, her voice solidifying into a quiet, absolute certainty. "Jessica needed to look directly at the woman who easily accomplished everything she failed to do. She needed to see that the universe doesn't reward narcissists. It rewards people like you and Liam." We finished our meal in a state of profound, comfortable peace. The lingering anxiety I had carried about Liam's past, the tiny, insecure whisper that wondered if I would ever measure up to the ghost of his 10-year marriage, completely vanished in that diner booth. I realized I didn't need to compete with a ghost, because the ghost was nothing more than a cautionary tale. Sarah paid the bill, completely ignoring my protests, and we walked back out to her truck. The afternoon sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over the city. As we drove back to our quiet, beautiful house in the suburbs, the mahogany cribs securely loaded in the back, I rested my hand on my stomach and closed my eyes. The debrief was over. The truth was fully unvarnished, and the past was officially dead and buried. I couldn't wait to walk through the front door, smell the fresh paint in the nursery, and wrap my arms around the incredible, resilient man who was waiting for me. When Sarah and I finally pulled into my driveway that evening, the golden hour was fading into a deep, peaceful twilight. I stepped out of the truck and walked up the front path, the familiar, comforting scent of fresh sage paint drifting through the open windows of the second floor. Liam met us at the door. He was wearing an old, paint-splattered t-shirt, his hair pushed back and a smudge of green on his cheek. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were incredibly bright. He took one look at me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and kissed me deeply, completely ignoring the fact that his sister was loudly dragging a heavy mahogany headboard up the front steps behind us. We spent the rest of the weekend assembling those cribs, watching my strong, capable husband carefully tighten every bolt and secure every mattress gave me a sense of security I had never known. The lingering shadows of his past, the ghost of the woman in the warehouse, it was all completely gone. The nursery was beautiful, safe, and ready for our future. That night, after Sarah went home and the house finally settled into a quiet stillness, Liam and I lay in bed. There is a deep, profound intimacy between us that transcends just the physical. It is a connection built on absolute transparency and the shared triumph of having overcome the darkness to find each other. I love the vulnerability we share. I love that we can be entirely ourselves, stripped of all masks and pretenses, and know with absolute certainty that we are safe. As I lay my head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong rhythm of his heartbeat, I thought about the dreams we used to talk about on our very first dates. Before the twins became a reality, we had spent hours dreaming of buying motorcycles and spending our summers traveling across the country, just the two of us, chasing the horizon. With 2 babies on the way, I knew those wild, freewheeling motorcycle trips were going to have to be put on hold for a very long time. They were going to gather dust in the garage for a few years while we navigated late-night feedings and diaper changes. But earlier that week, Liam's parents had taken us out to dinner and offered the most incredible alternative. They owned a massive, beautiful motorhome that they used for retirement road trips, and they cheerfully offered to lend it to us whenever we wanted. We could load up the twins, pack the baby gear, and still travel the country just at a slightly slower, much louder pace. "I was thinking about your parents' motor home," I whispered in the dark, tracing a circle on his chest. "Yeah," he murmured, kissing the top of my head. "You think we can handle 2 screaming babies in an RV across the Midwest?" "I think," I smiled, closing my eyes, "that it sounds like the greatest adventure of my life." Liam held me tighter, and we drifted off to sleep. The man who had once sat outside a downtown hotel in a cold car, watching his entire world fall apart, had finally found his way home. Light bulb, a valuable lesson for the listener. If there is one profound takeaway from Liam and Chloe's journey, it is this. Sometimes, the worst betrayal you will ever experience is just the universe violently clearing the path for your true happiness. When someone we love betrays us, the immediate instinct is to internalize the blame. We ask ourselves what we did wrong, what we lacked, and why we weren't enough to make them stay faithful. We try to bargain, endure, and shrink ourselves to fit into a relationship that is fundamentally broken. But infidelity is never about the inadequacies of the betrayed. It is always about the brokenness and entitlement of the betrayer. Jessica didn't cheat because Liam wasn't a good husband. She cheated because she possessed a void that no amount of love could ever fill. The most powerful thing Liam did was stop playing the victim and take his life back. It was painful, and the dark era of healing was exhausting, but walking away from a toxic situation is the only way to open the door for someone who will truly value you. Never settle for a partner who requires you to live in a state of constant anxiety or hypervigilance. You deserve a love that feels like a sanctuary, not a theater. And if you have ever been the victim of betrayal, remember this. The best, most devastating revenge you can ever inflict on a person who took you for granted isn't anger, yelling, or trying to ruin their life. The ultimate karma is completely removing them from your narrative, moving on, and living a fiercely beautiful, undeniably happy life without them. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more incredible true stories, and let me know your thoughts on Sarah's epic warehouse takedown in the comments below. Until next time, take care of yourselves.